Hello, it is July 22nd, 2024, and I just completed M.R. James, Count Magnus, and Other Ghost Stories. And at the end, I'll be telling you how to read this book because I think there's a definite way to do it. And I didn't really commit to it because I'm reading a lot of different books. And some days I committed to my plan, and then some days I didn't. Today I read 3 hours straight, and I'm pretty much delirious right now and cross-eyed. So took a bunch of notes because this is a very good book, but it's English British origin makes it a little bit calm, I guess, compared to today's scary tales. But once you know the history of it and how to read it properly, then you will enjoy it more. And I did enjoy the book. But if I tried to read it from front to back, 200 and some pages, I would not have enjoyed it nearly as much. In addition to that, there's a few things at the end of this in the appendix. It's one that's called Ghost Stories, which is only like 4 pages long. A Night in King's College Chapel, which was a few pages long. And then there's 2 prefaces, one to Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, which was another book, and then a preface to More Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, which was another book. Those, unless you want to know his writing style, I guess, or his method, you probably don't need to read that stuff at the back. So this book, the way they set it up, it's a Penguin Classics. There are other M.R. James collections, so you got to kind of be careful on which one you buy. So I'm going to go into that first. This is a list of 15, the first 15 of his stories. And he's got a total of 33 stories. But there's another book called The Collected Ghost Stories of M.R. James, which has 30 of them in there, at least according to Wikipedia. And then Wikipedia claims that there's 4 stories not in that book. So that obviously is 34. Those 4 that were supposedly not in that book are The Experiment, The Malice of Inanimate Objects, A Vignette, and The Fenstanton Witch. So if you are like a collector, which I'm not a crazy collector, but I do like to collect stuff sometimes. Some people, once they dive into an author, they want to read everything they do. But another way you might want to do it is to read some of their stuff and then see if you want to keep going or not. So this is a good introduction book. But if you really only had to get the other volume and you're going to get twice as many stories, you're probably better off buying that other book. Now, that said, I don't know what that other book costs on Amazon or wherever you're going to get it, but you should do a price comparison before you go with this one, unless you just want to try it out and see if it's your flavor. And then you're going to have to figure out what other book has the last 15 or maybe 18 or 19 published stories. For me, this was enough. So I've read all of the Edgar Allan Poe stories. I've read all of the H.P. Lovecraft stories. And those guys, if you're into horror fiction, I'm on my 25th Stephen King book. If you're into horror fiction, I mean, to me, those are the top 3 people. Now, you're always hoping, I would say Shirley Jackson should be thrown in there too, but not as much material, obviously, right? So you're always searching for an older horror writer that might be in their ballpark. And I don't know if anything exists like that. I've read other lists online with other people noted that I've not read yet. So perhaps I'll find a person like that one day, but I read all kinds of different stuff. So, I mean, I can't read horror 24/7. I'm reading 5 books at the same time. Well, 4 now. This one's done. But I digress. Let's get into this. So M.R. James was a strange person because he went to Cambridge, very highly intelligent person. and wrote a lot of serious stuff. And he was part of religious documentation slash sound like archaeology. I could be incorrect about that, but you can look more into his background if you wanted to. But he had kind of hunted for objects that were related to religion and things like that. And what's interesting about his writing style is he almost always has a character in it like that, that's going to find some object of some sort. And in that way, it reminds me a lot of National Treasure, where you're hunting for not treasure per se, but more of a relic, historical, religious relic kind of thing. And out of the 15 stories, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I counted 8 of them had objects. And I basically went through the 15, went back and kind of summarized in my mind what they were about. So the first one is about a manuscript. The second one is about the occult. And then you've got 7 more that had to do with objects, whether it's a piece of statuary or a tree or something embedded in a tree, or a plate or something like that. It's almost like video game Easter eggs kind of stuff. And then there was one about witches, one about the number 13, which is superstition related. And then, of course, Count Magnus is kind of like a vampire-like villain, but he's also an alchemist and kind of just a weird dude. And then there's one with a maze. So a lot of similar topics. There are some that kind of go off a little bit different. There's one involving this kid that disappeared. This guy's on trial. So they're not all about objects, but for the most part, they are. And the thing about these is it's more like Scooby-Doo-esque kind of mystery when it involves the objects. It's like, okay, what is this object? And then what did it do already to harm somebody? And let's look into why this happened. And then at the end, you get the poof, oh, this is what happened. But instead of the Scooby-Doo, where it's some person trying to confuse you for an earthly motive, it's always spiritual based and has to do with evil usually, right? So it says ghost stories, but there's demonic stuff in there as the villain many times rather than a ghost per se. And with the witch story, I also found it, because this is pretty old, it had a lot of stereotypical stuff in here that kind of made you think that they were trying to back up the things that happened in the witch trials in England or maybe in Salem, like explaining why people thought these things. And I can't, what's the year on this thing? I don't know what year. I would guess it was early 1900s, but I'm not sure. I'm going to look it up real quick. I'll try to keep myself blabbing a little bit while I talk in M.R. James. Yeah, the witch story kind of made me feel like they didn't want to admit they were wrong in a way about the things that had happened to witches. And see, look, this one really was a witch because this happened. And the fact that he actually did all of these investigative works, it makes you wonder if he really had found things that were creepy or possessed, or if it truly was just exaggerated. Okay, he was born in 1862 and died in 1936, so not modern times, but pretty old, but not crazy old, right? So not 1600s, 1700s. But yeah, with the witch stuff, it was kind of like, see, I told you so. This chick should have had this stuff happen to her because she was really evil and all this stuff. That kind of creeped me out a little bit. You never could really tell where his beliefs in reality, if they differed from the beliefs in this fictional book. And it's kind of creepy because the things that were haunted that he found in these books, you almost wondered, did he find some things like that were truly evil or possessed? And is there historical basis for some of these modern day horror films where you've got bad objects doing bad things to bad people? You kind of got the impression that he's almost writing about his own, I don't want to use the word adventures because that wouldn't be the right word, but his own experiences. And maybe perhaps he felt like he was in danger in a lot of these situations, and he's showing how it was kind of creepy. Now, that said, some of them involve monsters that are like furry and stuff, and maybe not that small, maybe like statues that start running around in the middle of the night and things like that. The monsters, I don't want to say they're not terribly scary, but they're not in your face like the whole time. So if you're watching a horror film, you expect these jump scares and you expect the monster to show up, throughout the film. So there's not just all backstory and then a monster at the end and then the movie's over. If you had a modern horror like that, nobody'd like it probably. Well, unfortunately for modern day people, that's kind of what it is. You hear these allusions to things that happened and theories about what happened, but then you don't really find out until the end. Or sometimes even it's kind of like, and this is what we think happened, and this person disappeared or whatever. I'm just paraphrasing from what is kind of floating around in my head after reading all this. Sometimes it's not so clear that they knew exactly what happened at the end, and it makes it a little bit spookier, I suppose. And being that he was reading these to students at Cambridge around Christmas, which I've done other videos about Christmas time, they used to tell ghost stories at Christmas. It's not really much of a tradition anymore. But back that time frame, it was a big deal. If you look up my Snapdragon video, they used to play Snapdragon around Christmas, which we did, and tell ghost stories. And that was kind of a tradition back then. So a lot of the stories he started creating were just for the students at Cambridge. And then people started clamoring for them. And then he started saying, well, maybe I should publish this stuff. So back to now, how you should read it. That is why I just told you that. Because if you read these in the right setting, they're going to be quite good for you. And what I would suggest is don't try to read more than one at a time. Read one at a time. Read it in the dark, alone, perhaps around Christmas or Halloween, when there's wind blowing outside or there's rain blowing on the window and it's already naturally spooky, because if you do that, you're going to get a cool old-timey vibe off of these stories. If, on the other hand, you do like me, and I read a lot of these on one at a time, which probably at least half. But if you read it in the middle of summer when it's hot as heck and it feels nothing like spooky Britain, then it's going to take away from the vibe of it. And the atmosphere of the scene, the scenery of where they are is very important in these. So midday, I'm not a night reader. I'm a daytime reader almost exclusively. So I did not get the spooky vibe as much as I could have. And you're going to want it because it's not in your face, terrifying horror. But it's still good. So if you want an old timey kind of creepy vibe, haunted house kind of thing, then this is a way good book. But if you like that kind of stuff, like I said, you should probably get the collected ghost stories of M.R. James. Read them one at a time on a spooky night until you're done with all of them, because you will like them all if you take your time. If you want to just get a taste of M.R. James and then go, you know what, I'm pretty good, which is where I'm at right now. Would I look out the second volume of this? Probably not. I feel like I got most of what I'm going to get out of M.R. James. Maybe that's not a fair assessment, but for me, I think it is, just because I read a lot of books. So if I had to compare this, because I like mysteries, I like, historical philosophy. I've got the Aeneid sitting here and Ben-Hur and collected works of Aristotle and things like that. To me, I enjoy those probably more than this. but this is a light read, so it's hard to compare it to those. But if I had to compare this to like an Agatha Christie or um, something like that, would I like the short story of one of these better than a murder mystery? Probably not. If I had to compare it to an H.P. Lovecraft or a Poe, no way, not even close. M.R. James is not in the wheelhouse of those guys, or even Stephen King for that matter. But I will say this about Stephen King. I feel like I'm qualified to say this at this point. Not everything he did is great or has done is great. He's got some really bomb, terrible ones, and he's got some really super good ones. So you kind of have to take your time with him and fish through them. This guy was consistent. I'll give him that. Consistent. Every story is good, creepy, but are they blockbusters? Maybe not. And why did Count Magnus get the headline on this? I'm not sure. There must be some reason. Back in the day, maybe more people read Count Magnus than the other stories. But there were some stories in here that I felt were better than Count Magnus. I think maybe because he comes across like a vampire and he's creepy, people thought when they published this, perhaps there's more to fixate on him than there is with some of these objects, and that may be true. So maybe I'm wrong about that, but there was some pretty good stories in here that I thought were better than Count Magnus. So put your comments in there. What do you think? Are you an M.R. James reader? Is he in the realm even close of H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, or Poe? To me, there's no topping Poe at all. H.P. Lovecraft is weird, more sci-fi horror, but really, really good. And then Stephen King is approaching those two guys. The thing that makes him more complicated is he writes some serious books that are good, really good too. So I'm reading the Shawshank Redemption right now, which is in 4 seasons. Oh, so good, just like the movie. And I'm not through it yet, so I'll give another review of that. But good, maybe not. I don't know, approaching great, I guess. Put your comments in there. Tell me what you think.